Welcome back, CRYPTID'S Den. I hope your day's been a good one so far. Before we dive into this wild and unforgettable story, I just want to take a second to say how much I appreciate you being here. Whether you're curled up in your coziest spot, sipping something warm, or just enjoying a quiet moment, your company means the world. Now, let's get into it. What would you do if, deep in the woods, you saw a mythical creature giving birth? This wasn't a story passed down around a fire. It really happened. They came to the forest to say goodbye. One last night beside the fire, one final cup of coffee beneath the trees that raised their children. But then, a scream tore through the silence. Not human, not animal, something in between. And just beyond the tree line, they saw her, tall, trembling, crouched in the ferns. She wasn't folklore, she was real, and she was in labor. Her name is Marianne. She didn't hear the story. She lived it. In this video, you'll witness the exact moment a creature most believe is myth gave birth. The decision the group had to make when they locked eyes with her, and how that night reshaped everything they thought they knew. Her husband, Ethan, and his brother, Tom, were right beside her. They weren't searching for legends, but they found one. And yes, Marianne filmed it. She's kept that footage hidden for 7 years. If you scroll past this, you'll never know the secret the forest tried to reveal. But if you're ready to see it, let us take you back to where it all began. It wasn't supposed to be their last summer. Not really. But something about the way Ethan Rivera packed the RV. Slow, methodical, pausing to touch the worn wood paneling like an old friend, suggested he knew. The truth was, they all did. Marianne watched from the porch of their suburban house, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her faded cardigan. The air was already turning sharp, but she barely felt it. For 25 years, they'd driven up to that same plot of land near the southern edge of Mount St. Helens. It had become a kind of ritual. Their children had learned to walk there, fight there, love the wild there. But now the kids were grown, scattered across coasts and cities and deadlines. And this summer, it would just be the three of them. Ethan, Marianne, and his older brother Tom, the old trio. Tom arrived late, as always, in a battered Dodge truck that coughed like a lifelong smoker. He swung down from the driver's seat, grinning under that sun-scorched bowl cap he never replaced. "You still make that canned coffee, Marianne?" he asked, slapping Ethan's back with a force that shifted his brother a full step. They set out that afternoon. Highway gave way to back roads, and back roads turned into gravel paths, disappearing into firs thick as cathedral columns. The RV struggled up the last incline like an aging dog, but made it. And when they finally pulled into that clearing, everything was the same, almost insultingly so. The tall evergreens leaned in like old neighbors eavesdropping. The air smelled of sap and sun-warmed bark. And as Ethan cut the engine, a quiet settled so deep it felt personal. For a while, it was exactly what they needed. They unpacked in silence, each of them falling into old rhythms. Tom pitched the tarp. Marianne wandered off to gather wildflowers, lupins, mostly, and tiny fireweed blooms. Ethan built a fire ring, meticulously stacking kindling like it was an art form. For dinner, they roasted sausage and warmed up baked beans in the dented tin pot they always brought. They drank from tin mugs and watched the stars, the kind of night you hold in your chest for decades. It was sometime after midnight when Ethan woke to the sound. A low, drawn-out howl. Not a coyote, not a wolf, not anything he could place. It didn't rise like a predator's call, or fall like mourning. It just was steady and ancient and bone-deep. He stayed still, eyes open to the darkness of the RV ceiling. No one else stirred. When the sound finally stopped, he turned over, told himself it was nothing. A dream. Maybe Tom had been right about those mushrooms. The next morning, Tom suggested they walk to the creek. "We'll always do," he said, loading his flask with something stronger than water. The hike was easy, even with Ethan's bad knee. It led through brush and down into a narrow ravine carved by snowmelt over centuries. The creek gurgled softly over stones, catching light between branches. And that's when they saw it. Tom was the first to stop. "Hey," he said, his voice gone strange. Not quite whisper, not quite shout. He pointed down. In the soft, wet earth near the water's edge were tracks. Not bare, not human. Something in between, at least 13 inches long, wide at the toe, with clear impressions of individual pads and claws. Not fangs, not hooves, toes, real ones. 5 of them, thick, sunken deeply into the mud, as if whatever made them had real weight. Ethan crouched, reached out a hand, and hesitated. "Jesus," he muttered. "It's fresh." They looked at each other, old memories swirling in their eyes. Stories told around fire pits, over cans of beer, rumors. The one trip in '87 when they found a pile of stripped deer bones arranged in a circle. The time in '94 they swore they heard footsteps circling their tent. But no prints the next day. But this was different. They followed the tracks for only a short stretch before the underbrush became impassable. The prints vanished into a mess of snapped ferns and broken limbs. Something had moved through here. Something big. That night they didn't say much. Even Marianne, usually a soft tide of questions, kept her words close. The fire popped. Moths danced. Something cracked in the woods nearby, sharp as bone breaking. Around 2 in the morning it came again. That sound! Lower this time. Closer. Marianne sat up in bed, her hand already reaching for Ethan's. He met her eyes in the dim, both of them fully awake now, hearts hammering. "That's not wind," she whispered. Outside, silence, but not empty silence. A silence holding its breath. By dawn, she found them, prints, again. But not on the forest floor this time. On the RV, handprints. Smudged across the dusty side of the vehicle. Huge, smeared with earth. And worse, hair. Long, coarse strands. Dark, tangled, stuck in the crevice near the passenger door. She didn't scream. She just stared until Ethan joined her. Then Tom. They all stood there, staring at those handprints, those strands of fur like relics. No one made jokes now. Something had touched their world in the night. Something that walked upright, that reached out. And still, they stayed. Because some part of them needed to know. That afternoon, they pushed deeper into the woods. Every branch that snapped underfoot felt like a drumbeat. Trees stood too still. Birds vanished from earshot. Marianne glanced back more than once. Then they found the nest. A clearing, flattened in a perfect circle. Leaves crushed. Broken branches stacked loosely around the edge, like someone, or something, had tried to build shelter. And in the center, a hollow layered with moss and twigs and dark fur. Ethan crouched down, brushed his hand across the center, and lifted his fingers. Still warm. A breeze passed through, carrying with it a scent they couldn't place. Animal? But not. Earthy, sour sweet, tinged with something like blood and bark. Tom muttered, "I don't like this." Ethan agreed, but neither moved. The air shifted. A branch creaked behind them. No wind. For a moment, none of them breathed. Then Marianne turned her head slowly, and that's when she saw it. A shape, not moving, not blinking, watching. And it was closer than they ever expected. Not 30 yards away. Half shadow, half real. Massive. Covered in thick mottled fur. Arms long enough to brush the ground. Its face unreadable. Part ape, part ache. And its belly distended. Heavy, pregnant. The truth landed like thunder in Marianne's chest. She's going to give birth. She didn't speak it out loud. She didn't need to. Ethan stepped in front of her instinctively. Tom raised a hand, not in threat, but reverence. None of them moved. And the creature? She didn't either. Not yet. For hours after they returned from the clearing, the world around them moved like it had grown heavy with breath. The firewood snapped under Tom's boots louder than it should have. Every whisper of pine felt like a voice waiting to be understood. Ethan kept glancing toward the trees as if they might lean forward and speak. And Marianne, her silence was a storm just waiting for the wind. No one wanted to say it first, but it was there, right under their tongues, that they had seen something not meant to be seen. That the prints in the soil weren't just coincidence, and the shape watching from the shadows wasn't a trick of tired eyes. That this wasn't over. The next morning, fog clung low to the ground like a veil someone forgot to lift. Marianne stood outside the RV, arms crossed, eyes locked on a new set of tracks near the fire pit. Smaller, narrower, still barefoot. There were more of them, she said, not looking away. Ethan crouched beside her, brushing the outline gently with his fingers. The soil gave beneath the weight, pliable and wet, perfect for catching the imprint. 5 toes, long, arch, deep heel. Long arch, the exact shape of the first one I'd seen, but thinner, lighter, maybe younger. 2 sets. Tom added from behind. 1 heavy, 1 light. Moving light. Through the bramble and up toward the ridge. The tracks weaved between roots like they belonged here, as though this forest bent for them, opened for them. 30 minutes in, the wind changed. Ethan felt it first. Cooler, tighter. The trees grew closer, tighter knit like hands clasped in prayer. Somewhere ahead, a woodpecker tapped. But then it stopped. Everything did. It wasn't the kind of silence that just happens. It was the kind that chooses. Then Marianne stopped. Before them, nestled between 2 old-growth firs, was a stretch of moss-covered ground torn up in spirals. The marks were unnatural, sharp, erratic, as if something large had turned in circles again and again until the ground gave way. In the middle of it all, a broken branch lodged in the dirt, sticking straight up. Ethan pulled it free and stared. Blood. Not fresh, but not dry, either. Marianne backed up. Something was hurt here. Tom stepped forward, scanning the clearing. Or fighting. A few feet away, tufts of hair caught in a low branch. Long, black, coarse. Just like before. Ethan placed it in a plastic bag from his back pocket without a word. The forest shuddered. Not with wind, but weight. And that's when they heard it. A soft thud, followed by another, then a dragging noise. Something heavy, moving slow. Deliberate. Ethan raised a hand. They froze. Whatever it wasn't close. But it wasn't far either. Marianne leaned toward the sound. Then Tom yanked her back just as a shape moved through the mist. They ducked. Breath shallow. Through the undergrowth, they caught glimpses. A shoulder wider than any man's. A silhouette with limbs too long to be familiar. Moving without hesitation, almost with grace. But it was the head that broke the air in Marianne's lungs. Tilted low, scanning the earth as if tracking something. As if it were searching. But for what? They stayed still long after the sound faded. No one said a word until they reached camp again. Lips too dry to form anything true. Only when they sat by the fire, dusk curling at their heels, did Ethan speak. It was looking for someone. Marianne nodded slowly, or something, and then she asked the question none of them wanted answered. What if it's not just her? The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the indigo dark. Night fell fast that evening, too fast, and with it came a sharp edge to every sound. The rustle of leaves, the creak of bark, the whistle of air through hollows. Later, long past midnight, Tom couldn't sleep. He stepped outside, flask in hand, and stood facing the woods. The air was still. Too still. Then he saw it again. Not the creature, but light. Small. Flickering. Not fire. Not natural. Like reflection. Like eyes. He didn't speak of it in the morning. Neither did Ethan, who also hadn't slept, though he never said why. Marianne made coffee in silence, her movements more careful than usual, as though noise itself had become sacred. That afternoon, they returned to the place where the prints first began, by the creek. What they found made Ethan drop his mug. More tracks. Fresh, leading back toward the clearing. And next to them, just beside the edge of the water, something else. A small, handmade figure, twigs bent into the shape of a creature. Arms wide, feet big, wrapped in woven grass and bark. Primitive. Deliberate, a message. They didn't know, but now they couldn't leave. Because something had seen them, and something had spoken back. The sun slipped behind the ridge earlier than expected, swallowed by the horizon like it knew something the rest of them didn't. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor, and even the trees stood still, as though waiting for something unspoken to happen. Marianne felt it first, a shift in the air, sudden and sharp. The kind that presses down on your chest before anything visible moves. She had gone out for firewood, only a dozen yards from the RV, when she stopped mid-step. Her body didn't react with fear at first. Just a silence so complete it deafened everything else. Between two spruce trees ahead, beyond the last sliver of sun, something moved. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. She didn't scream. Instead, she whispered, "Ethan, Tom, come here, now." By the time the men reached her, the thing was still there, half in shadow, half in the thinning dusk. Massive, covered in matted fur that shimmered oddly in the remaining light. Its back was broad, rising and falling with deep, labored breaths. One long arm rested on the ground. The fingers, yes, fingers, curled in the moss like roots, but it was the belly that stilled them all. Round, low, heavy, the unmistakable fullness of something close to birth. For a moment, the forest seemed to exhale. And in that breath, Ethan took one step forward. Marianne caught his arm but didn't pull. None of them moved beyond that. No one spoke. They simply watched. The creature. No, she wasn't unaware. She shifted slightly, not to flee, but to brace herself. Her other hand curled around a low log, steadying her body. The sound that came next was not loud, but it pulled the blood straight from Ethan's face. A low, guttural moan. Not of threat, but pain. Then another, rhythmic, strained, echoing through the trees like ancient song. Marianne's hand tightened around Ethan's. "She's in labor," she said, barely more than breath. "Oh God, Ethan. She's giving birth." Tom took a single, unconscious step back. "We shouldn't be seeing this," he muttered. "We shouldn't be here." But they didn't leave. They couldn't. The creature lowered herself into a crouch, gripping the moss beneath her with both hands. Her body heaved. The moans came closer together now, heavier. Her breath was shallow, trembling. She leaned into the pain, head dipped forward, spine arching. And then, everything stilled. Marianne held her breath. The forest waited. Even the fire back at camp seemed to still its crackle. From between her bent legs, something emerged. Small, slick, covered in dark, fine fur. It trembled in the cool air, curled in on itself. The mother reached down gently, so gently, and lifted the infant to her chest. She cradled it in her massive arms, and the sound she made then was nothing any of them had ever heard. A lullaby, ancient, low and vibratory. A hum that was not quite music, not quite language, but unmistakably full of love. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world itself had paused to listen. And then, Another cry. Sharper. Higher. The mother's body stiffened again. They hadn't noticed it before, but her belly hadn't fully deflated. She rocked back slightly, a new tremor racking her limbs. She was having twins. Ethan stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat. "We have to do something," he said, but Marianne gripped his wrist, hard. "No, we can't. This moment isn't ours." The second birth came faster. The infant dropped gently onto the moss and was quickly swept up into the warmth of her fur. The mother lay back, her arms around both newborns, and began to sway slightly, forward and back, like a wave learning to breathe again. For minutes, the trio didn't speak, didn't move. They just watched as something impossibly sacred unfolded in front of them, more real than anything they'd ever experienced. Then, without warning, the mother jerked. Her head snapped upward, nostrils flaring. Her breath hitched. One of the infants mewled, a sound so faint it barely reached them. The mother tried to rise, but collapsed again. Her breathing grew erratic. Her limbs twitched. The swaying stopped. Ethan took another step. But Tom blocked him this time. "No sudden moves. If she panics..." But Ethan wasn't listening. He crouched slowly, hands raised, eyes locked on the mother. She looked directly at him now, her gaze neither wild nor tame, just pleading. A moment passed that felt like hours. Then Ethan did the unthinkable. He knelt and reached out slowly, palm open, not to touch, but to offer presence. The mother exhaled, a deep, shuddering release. Her eyes closed, her breath calmed. She held her children tighter, and from the trees behind them, something else moved. A flicker of brown, another figure. Smaller, older, hunched, watching. Ethan didn't turn, but he felt it. So did Tom. So did Marianne. They weren't alone. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was an invitation. An accident written in moss and time and blood, now unfolding into something none of them could yet name. They backed away together, slowly, leaving the clearing in sight. But just before the trees swallowed the view, Marianne turned for one last look. The mother looked back and nodded, just once. A promise passed between them. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. The night was unusually still, as though the forest itself had entered a trance. Smoke from their small campfire curled upward in thin, reverent strands. Nobody spoke. Ethan sat with his back to the flames, his eyes fixed on the trees beyond, though he didn't see them. He was somewhere else, back in that clearing, in the moss, beside something that was never meant to be real. Marianne crouched close, arms wrapped around her legs, not for warmth, but grounding. Tom sat with a flask in hand, untouched, forgotten. They had witnessed a birth, not of a creature, of a world. And now they were afraid to close their eyes. At first light, Ethan returned alone to the spot. Marianne wanted to go, but something in her, maybe instinct, maybe awe, told her not to. Tom didn't even ask. He just nodded and watched his brother disappear into the trees. The clearing was empty, but not untouched. The moss was pressed down, still damp where the creature had laid, imprints where her hands had gripped the earth, small tufts of fur caught on low branches, tiny indentations where the newborns had rested, and something else, fresh footprints, lighter than hers, circling the spot with purpose. Ethan knelt, examining them. They were bipedal, similar structure, but smaller, more cautious. Tracks of an observer, not a participant. He was being watched. He stood slowly, not with fear, but respect, and turned full circle. There was nothing, but the forest felt different. Less distant, less closed. Back at camp, Marianne met his eyes before he even spoke. She moved, she said, not as a question. "Yeah," he replied, and someone else was there. They spent the morning in silence, occasionally glancing toward the woods. They were no longer just campers. Something had shifted between them and the land, like being allowed past a door that had always been locked. By noon, they heard it. A faint rustling in the underbrush, too heavy for a squirrel, too consistent for the wind. Ethan rose first. Tom followed. They moved carefully, not hunting, not hiding, just listening. Then they saw her, not the mother, but the infant, one of them, perched on a sloped rock near a fallen log, wrapped in shadows, but visible enough to stop breath in a throat. Its fur was still damp in patches, its eyes barely open. But it looked at them, directly. No fear. Just curiosity. A twig snapped behind them. They turned. Marianne had followed, barefoot, heart pounding. Then another shape moved through the trees. The mother. Her movement was slower now. Her body was weak. One arm curled tightly around the second infant, the other braced against a trunk. But her eyes were alert, and then she did something no one expected. She stepped forward. Only a pace. Then another. The infant on the rock turned and ambled back toward her, unsteady but determined. Marianne pressed her hand to her chest. "They're learning," she whispered. But it wasn't just that. The mother stopped at the edge of the light, and, with a deep, low hum, turned her head toward Ethan. She was asking something, or offering. Tom didn't breathe. Marianne stepped forward slightly, but Ethan raised a hand. "I think she wants us to see." No one moved for a long time. Then, as if drawn by something older than language, Ethan stepped closer. Just one pace, and lowered himself to the ground, palms up. The infant turned toward him, wobbled, took 2 steps forward. Then Marianne gasped, because from behind the trees, more shadows moved. Not 1, not 2. 6, tall, broad, covered in fur of varying tones. Chestnut, silver, black, some scarred, some limping, silent as wind on snow. They stood in a semicircle, watching, their eyes deep with unreadable depth. A council. A family. A gathering. Not one sound passed between them. Only breath. Only stillness. And then, from the smallest of the group, a low sound. Barely audible. Almost a chant, a tone. A vibration. The others responded, not in volume, but in resonance. The forest shimmered. The air buzzed. Marianne's legs gave slightly beneath her. Tom took a step back, his voice gone dry. "Is this a ritual?" Ethan didn't answer. Because at that exact moment, the infant took another step and touched his hand. Tight and fractured, not forward, not back, but into something raw and impossible. The mother stepped forward, placed her free hand over her chest, and bowed her head, just once. The others did the same, a gesture of trust, recognition. Marianne's breath caught as her eyes filled. They're letting Anne's breath caught as her eyes filled. "They're letting us in." Ethan didn't move. Didn't need to. He understood. They all did. This was no longer a sighting. This was a moment of crossing. And they'd never be the same again. But before anyone could speak, a distant crack rang out. Not from the trees. From beyond. A rifle. Tom snapped toward the sound. Hunters. The mother jerked upright. The infant squealed. The others disappeared into the brush so fast the wind followed them. Only Ethan remained, kneeling, his hand still warm from where the young one had touched it. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It carried weight and a warning. Whatever came next wasn't just nature. It was protection, and maybe even war. The sound of the rifle cracked through the trees like lightning slicing the sky. Ethan didn't flinch, but his blood turned cold. Tom was already moving, boots kicking up pine needles as he sprinted back toward the RV. Marianne stood motionless at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed on where the Bigfoot family had vanished. For one long breath, she didn't blink. Then she whispered. They weren't hiding. They were trusting us. They spent the rest of that day in silence, locking down the camp without saying they were doing it. The fire was kept low. Lanterns stayed off. The hum of the generator was silenced. Even the clinking of tin cups was muffled in their hands. Every noise outside now felt louder than it should. Every snapping twig a warning. Every gust of wind too easily mistaken for footsteps. But the night passed without return fire. No more shots. No more movement. By dawn, the woods had swallowed the fear again. And in its place, something else began to grow. Connection. It started small. A pile of stones arranged in a spiral just outside the RV, where there had been only pine needles the night before. Ethan saw it first. Not a game trail marker, not a prank. It was purposeful. Marianne bent to examine it, fingers brushing each stone. She left this, she said. For us. Tom shook his head. Or a warning. But Ethan didn't believe that. Not anymore. That same afternoon, while following the old deer trail behind the creek, they saw her again. Just the mother, alone. She stood across a narrow ravine, bathed in a shaft of sunlight like some cathedral statue carved inside. In her, both children, pressed close to her chest. She didn't run. She didn't retreat. She just stood there, watching. Then she slowly turned, and with one deliberate step, vanished back into the trees. Each day after that, more signs appeared. A handprint in the dew on the RV window. A piece of bark, carved with symbols none of them could translate but somehow understood. The crack of branches as something moved through the dark. Not hunting, but circling, checking. And once, only once, Ethan woke to the scent of something wild, deep and musky, hanging in the air around their sleeping bags. As though she had been there, as though she had stood watch. One evening, just after the sun dipped behind the hills and dusk rolled in like mist, Marianne placed a small pile of apples and blueberries in the clearing, a gesture, a peace offering. Tom scoffed, but said nothing. By morning, the fruit was gone, and in its place, a feather, long, jet black, wedged upright into the soil. I think, Ethan said, this is how they speak. What do you think it means? Marianne asked softly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because connection wasn't coming through language. It was coming through silence, through presence, through witnessing. And then it happened. 3 days later, while walking along the river bend, they saw movement ahead. A figure, smaller than the mother, but still far too large to be human. It was the adolescent, one of the twins, walking upright, awkward, learning. Ethan crouched. Marianne knelt beside him. The creature saw them and didn't flee. It stared, curious, blinking slowly, breathing in quick little bursts. Then, after a moment that felt impossibly long, it reached out a hand, not in invitation, not in fear. Just mirrored. Ethan slowly lifted his own, palm open. No contact. Just recognition. Tom stood behind them, arms crossed, still skeptical. But even he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The young one tilted its head, then dropped its hand. Then dropped its hand, then disappeared into the brush without a sound. Later that night, they heard the hum again. The one the mother had made during the birth. Only now, it was layered. All little voices, harmony, a song, a ritual. They listened from the safety of their fire, heads tilted like children at bedtime stories. It wasn't music, not exactly. It was something older, something that belonged to the trees, to the moss, to the bone. By the time the song faded, none of them had moved for over an hour. That was the night Tom finally said it aloud. "We're not guests anymore, are we?" Ethan shook his head. "No, we're part of something now. But what?" He didn't know. But the next morning, the answer came. They woke to find a new set of prints circling their camp. Smaller, lighter. And near the fire pit, a twisted piece of vine bent into the shape of a figure. Arms spread, legs rooted, a mimic of Ethan. Marianne held it in trembling hands. "They're watching us as much as we're watching them." Ethan looked up at the trees, his voice low. Maybe more. But it wasn't fear he felt. It was responsibility, and something else too, gratitude. Because when the mother looked into his eyes that first night, it hadn't been panic. It had been trust. When the young one mimicked his hand, it wasn't mimicry. It was recognition. They weren't just surviving in the woods. They were being allowed to witness a secret. And once you've seen something like that, you don't walk away the same. Not ever. And deep down, Ethan knew something was coming. And they had a choice to make. Stay and protect what had trusted them. Or leave and let the wild face the world alone. The rain came without warning. A slow, heavy curtain falling over the ridge like the woods had decided it was time to wash everything clean. Thunder rolled far off, deep and low like the belly of the mountain was shifting in its sleep. Ethan stood beneath the tarp, staring at the trees, waiting, not for the storm to pass. He knew storms didn't care about waiting. But for that feeling to return. That thrum beneath his ribs that told him something was coming. Marianne was inside, organizing supplies for the third time in an hour. She couldn't stop moving. Couldn't stop her hands from shaking. Her eyes kept drifting to the carved figure on the windowsill. The one the young Bigfoot had left behind. She didn't say it aloud, but in her bones, she felt it too. Tom sat on the step of the RV with his shotgun laid across his knees. Not in aggression. In readiness. The signs had changed. No more stone spirals. No more feathers. Only silence. Heavy. Watching. Then, around midday, the first footprints appeared. Not theirs. Not the Bigfoot's. Deep boot prints. Big, deliberate. Leading down the slope from the direction of the logging road. Ethan knelt beside one. Fingers trailing the edge. "Military boots," he murmured. "New." Tom's jaw tightened. "They don't belong here." Marianne stepped closer, voice taut. "Do you think they saw them?" Tom didn't answer. They followed the prints just far enough to confirm what they feared. More than one pair. 3, maybe 4. Men with weapons, cutting into the woods with purpose. Hunters. Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about defense. That evening, as dusk draped its long shadow over the camp, a snap echoed from the tree line. Sharp, close. Tom was up in seconds, weapon raised, but Ethan stepped in front of him. "Not yet," he whispered. "We don't know what they know. They didn't sleep that night. And at dawn, Marianne found the first blood, just beyond the ridge, where the ferns grew thick and wild. A smear of crimson trailed across the moss. Not much. Just enough to stain. But it... fur. Long, black, unmistakable. Freshly torn. Ethan turned away, fists clenched. "They shot one," Marianne whispered. "We don't know that," Tom said, but even he didn't believe it. They moved fast. Supplies packed. Noise kept to a whisper. But the forest had changed. Its pulse raced. Birds that had sung days ago now fell silent. The underbrush trembled not from wind, but footsteps. Heavy ones. By noon, they heard shouting. Heavy ones. By noon, they heard shouting. Voices, human, rough, cutting through the green like blades. Tom ducked behind a log, motioning the others down. They waited. And then, across the clearing, a man appeared. Tall, broad rifle in hand, face unreadable beneath a black cap. He scanned the area like he belonged there, like he was owed something. But the way he moved, too fast, too confident, as if tracking. Then another joined him. Then a third. Ethan's heart pounded. They were heading toward the creek, toward the nest. "Marianne," he said under his breath. "We can't let them get closer." She didn't hesitate. "Then we lead them away." Tom stared at them like they'd gone mad. "You're talking about distracting men with guns. We're talking about protecting a mother and her children," Ethan replied. "You in?" Tom swore under his breath, then nodded once. They didn't run. They moved loud. Obvious. Talking just loud enough. Dropping gear. Snapping branches. Leading the hunters deeper away from the nest, toward the old trail that wound through the thickest part of the forest. It worked. Two of the men turned. Voices rose. "Hey, who's there?" Ethan threw a rock, crashing it through a thicket. Footsteps followed. The chase began. Marianne led them in circles, doubling back through thick underbrush, cutting across stream beds. Her lungs burned. Her knees ached, but she kept going. Ethan followed close, with Tom taking rear guard, watching the shadows for movement that wasn't theirs. After nearly an hour, the woods opened to a bluff, sharp rocks and sheer drop. They stopped. No voices. No gunfire. Only breath. And then, just behind them, a shape. Ethan spun, hands up. But it wasn't a man. It was her. The mother, eyes wide, chest heaving, holding one of the twins in her arms, and behind her, two more, Bigfoots, older, taller, one scarred across the chest, the other missing an eye. They surrounded the trio in silence. No aggression, only stillness. Then, movement. From the trees behind the Bigfoots, one of the hunters appeared. He froze. So did they. The forest held its breath. The man raised his gun, shaky, uncertain, and the scarred Bigfoot stepped forward. Slow, deliberate. A sound rose from his throat. Not a growl, but something deeper. A command. A warning. The man didn't move, but then something shifted in the air, so fast it was invisible. A blur of motion, and the rifle fell to the ground, ripped from his hands by something unseen. He ran. Fast. Wild. Crashing through the brush like a beast himself. Gone. No one followed. The forest exhaled. The Bigfoots looked to Ethan, then to Marianne, then to Tom. Not thanks. Acknowledgement. Then, as one, they turned and disappeared into the woods. It was over. For now, but the line had been drawn. Ethan knew this wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a bond, a pact, and it had been sealed. The forest was never truly silent, but that morning it came as close as nature ever allows. Mist hung low along the treetops, not rolling, not moving, just suspended like the moment itself refused to pass. Everything was softer, even the light. Marianne stood just outside the RV, arms wrapped tight across her chest, her eyes locked on the same stretch of trees where it had all begun. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Behind her, Ethan was folding the tarp with slow, deliberate motions, as though rushing might tear the air between now and then. Tom cleaned the coffee pot like it mattered, like something needed to stay normal. They weren't leaving because they wanted to. They were leaving because they had to. The hunters were gone. For now. Disappeared like smoke after a hard rain. But the message had been clear. More would come. Not just men with rifles and steel-tipped boots, but stories, lies, curiosity in its most destructive form. And the ones they'd met, the mother, her twins, the others, they deserved more than that. They deserved more than that. They deserved the woods, So they packed. They didn't talk about the figure carved from bark now sitting quietly inside the RV window, or the spiral of pine cones someone had left on the edge of camp during the night, or the small, worn stone placed carefully on Ethan's folding chair, smooth and warm as if it had been held by something with meaning. But they noticed, and they understood. Sometime in the late afternoon, just as Ethan zipped the final bag, something shifted in the air. Not weather, not tension, presence. Mary Ann turned first, her breath caught. There, just beyond the fire pit at the edge of the underbrush, stood the mother. Upright, strong, whole. The twins were with her, one nestled against her chest, the other standing, taller now, by her side. They weren't hiding anymore. Tom stepped up beside Ethan, mouth open, hands loose at his sides. She came to say goodbye. Ethan nodded once, eyes locked on hers, for a long time. No one moved. Then the young one, the one who had touched Ethan's hand, stepped forward, no longer uncertain. It walked with purpose, with grace, and in its small hand it held something, a bundle of leaves tied with twine, something so small it could have been overlooked a dozen times. The creature crossed the open space slowly, deliberately, and placed it at Ethan's feet. Then it looked up, and Ethan bent to one knee, picked up the gift, and held it to his chest without speaking. The air between them seemed to hum, not with sound, but with understanding. Then the young one turned and walked back. The mother nodded, one slow, reverent dip of her head. And just like that, they turned and disappeared into the green. No rustle, no sound. Gone, but not lost. As the last light slipped through the canopy, Ethan lit one final fire. Not for warmth, not for food, for memory, for ceremony. They sat together, the three of them, around the small flame, cups in hand, watching the embers like they might spell something sacred. "Do you think anyone would believe us?" Tom asked finally. Mary Ann smiled, soft. Does it matter?" Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out the bundle the young one had given him. He unwrapped it slowly, layer by layer, until at the center, nestled between dried fern and moss, was a single feather, black, long, glossy. Not from a bird they knew. Beneath it, two small stones, one pale, one deep red. Balance, duality. "It's not about belief," Ethan said. "It's about knowing." They didn't talk much after that, because some stories aren't meant to be told in full. Some stories live in the silence between footsteps. In the breath before dawn, in the space where the human and the wild meet for just one heartbeat and understand each other. The next morning, the RV pulled away from the clearing without fanfare. No one looked back, not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't need to. What they had seen was real, and real things don't fade when you stop looking. They remain, waiting, breathing, becoming legend. The gravel crunched beneath the RV's tires as it rolled down the winding road out of the forest. No one inside spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because anything spoken aloud might break whatever fragile, invisible thread still tied them to what they had just left behind. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel, eyes scanning the rearview mirror more often than the road ahead, not for safety, but for something he couldn't name. Mary Ann sat beside him, holding the feather-wrapped stones in her lap like a relic. Tom leaned against the window in the back, one boot resting on the seat, the other hand tapping a slow, unconscious rhythm against the glass. The trees thinned, the road smoothed. Civilization crept back in, subtle at first. A fence, a rusted road sign, the shell of a burned-down barn. But it felt wrong, too structured, too quiet, too human. Days passed, then weeks. Each of them returned to their separate homes, to their routines, their clocks, their neighbors with stories about taxes and weather. And yet, none of them could sleep without first checking their windows. None of them could walk through a park without scanning the tree line, and sometimes in the quiet between waking and dreaming, they swore that they could still hear it. The hum, the low melodic tone that had once vibrated through the moss and bone of the forest. Ethan didn't tell anyone. Not really. He typed parts of it once, then deleted them. He thought about sending a letter to a local biologist, but stopped when he saw a headline about someone faking tracks in the Appalachians. He didn't want this story dismissed. It didn't belong in tabloids or blurry YouTube footage. It belonged in silence, in reverence. Marianne took up painting again. She painted trees mostly, denser forests with too much shadow, not enough light, and always, a suggestion of movement between the trunks. She never painted faces, just impressions, silhouette. Once, she painted a figure with two children, nestled close, barely visible beneath a web of greens and blacks. She didn't show it to anyone but Ethan. He looked at it for a long time, then said only, "Ah." She nodded, and they never spoke of it again. Tom moved into a cabin outside Bend, alone. He told people he just needed quiet, but sometimes at the bar in town, he'd go still mid-sentence, staring toward the dark patch of woods across the road. When people asked what he was looking at, he'd shake his head, take a drink, and mutter, "Nothing you'd believe." But one afternoon, in late October, Ethan received a package. No return address. No note. Inside was a single Polaroid, a blurry image of the same clearing. Empty, but on the edge of the frame, barely visible, was the curve of something massive, covered in fur, cradling something smaller. Behind it, high on the tree, a mark carved into the bark, a spiral. Ethan stared at it for hours. That night he walked into the yard behind his house and left a stone at the base of the oak tree. Then another. Then a third. He didn't say anything. He just stood there watching the trees, just in case. The following morning, the stones were gone. In their place, a single sprig of fern tied with twine. It didn't end with them. The encounter, the story, the bond. It simply faded into the soil of the world, waiting for the next one, willing to see. To stay quiet, to listen. Somewhere, deep in the forest, the mother still moves. The twins are older now, stronger. They walk upright, quietly, carefully. They know the sounds of danger and the sense of kindness. They know that not every human takes, that some give, that some stay silent when it matters most. And every so often, at the edge of dusk, when the trees grow too still and the birds hold their breath, a fire is lit, small, respectful. And beside it, someone sits, no camera, no questions, just a memory burning slow beside their feet, waiting, watching, remembering what the world once tried to forget. And somewhere in the dark, something watches back. Still here, still safe, still sacred. In the quiet folds of the wilderness, where the human world thins and something older takes its place, we are sometimes given the rarest of gifts. Not proof, not spectacle, but presence. A moment, a breath, a heartbeat shared between species, between lives, between two truths that aren't meant to collide, but when they do, leave behind something unshakable. This story, like the forest it came from, was never about fear or conquest. It was about grace, about recognition, about the silent understanding that there are still wonders in this world untouched by noise, by ego, by greed. Wonders that don't ask to be believed, only to be respected. Somewhere out there, beyond the lights of towns and the reach of satellites, life continues on its own terms, wild, patient, knowing. It doesn't need our names, our labels, or our myths. It only needs space, and if we're lucky enough to witness it, truly witness it, we don't return the same. Because once you've looked into something wild and seen not a monster, not a myth, but a mother, a child, a people, you carry that knowing forever. In a world that rushes to divide, to explain, to dominate. Perhaps what we need most is to pause, to listen, to ask less and observe more, to understand that mystery is not the absence of knowledge, but the presence of humility. And maybe the real wilderness is not out there among the trees. Maybe it's the space inside us we've forgotten to tend, the quiet places we've overgrown with certainty, with distraction, with noise. But stories like this clear a path. They remind us of the beauty in the unseen, the power of compassion, and the quiet courage it takes to protect something without needing to possess it. Thank you for walking this path with us. If this story moved you, sparked something in your chest, or reminded you of something you've long forgotten, leave us a comment. Share your thoughts, your reflections, your questions. We'd love to hear what this journey stirred in you. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, true stories that live between the seen and the sacred, consider subscribing to the channel. Follow along. There are more paths to walk, more fires to sit beside, and more truths still waiting in the dark. Until then, keep your eyes open, and your heart even more so.